As you know, I've taken the month of December off. My good friend Jerry Agar has been filling in for me. I've been on book leave, finishing up my next tome. But I came back today because Dr. Jeffrey Adicott is in town, and I just had to meet with him in person, and you'll see why he joins me in studio. Welcome back to the show, Doctor.
Thanks, Ezra.
Now, you're a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. military, but now you're a professor of terrorism law at the St. Mary's University School of Law in Texas. Tell me a little bit about your background. That's a lot of titles and a lot of things you've done.
Yeah, I did 20 years in the U.S. military. I was the senior legal advisor to all of the U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. I retired in 2000, went to the law school in San Antonio, Texas. After 9/11, I went to the dean and said, you know, there's going to be a lot of new legal issues that are going to rise up in this war on terror. Let's form a center to think about these things. And so I'm the founder and now the director of the Center for Terrorism Law. We're in our 9th year of operation.
Well, it's amazing. You've written a textbook. I'd like to show it on the screen for a second, because there is terrorism law. I mean, terrorism and law are almost opposites when you think about it, but yep. You know, it's governed by, you know, common law, court cases, but also, I suppose, statutes, right?
Sure. You know, you can't drink a cup of coffee without having a lawyer with you, and war is no exception. So terrorism law deals with all the legal issues associated with terrorism, to include indefinite detention, cyber terrorism, bioterrorism, the Patriot Act, you know, killing, drone activity, war, peace. So it's all those issues.
Well, I mean, the idea of war and a law of war, it's contradictory. I think it would strike people at first glance to be contradictory, because war is what happens when you can't negotiate things, when you can't agree. I mean, to a contract, to a treaty, to follow the rules. That's in a way, a war is a failure of the law, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, but we've always had rules associated with how you fight wars.
So how we govern ourselves,
yeah,
really.
How you govern yourselves. And if you look at the Torah, the Old Testament, you'll see that there are very specific commandments about when you go to battle, you can't cut down the fig trees, you have to allow people an opportunity to surrender, you can't brutalize the prisoners. So we've always had rules associated with warfare from the very beginning, and of course the Geneva Conventions comes to mind to most people when you talk about the rules associated with war.
And some of this is an expression of our own morality.
Yeah.
Some of it is also pragmatically common sense. I mean, if you were going to kill everyone and take no prisoners, your enemy would probably fight harder. And as opposed to if they knew they could surrender and be treated honorably, and hell, in ancient days, you could probably get a ransom for returning them.
That's right, and there's a lot of reasons pragmatically. You don't want to waste limited assets. You only have so many assets. You want to facilitate the restoration of peace, which means you don't brutalize the civilian population. And plus, if you're a democracy, most importantly, you're playing to the audience at home. They're not going to support our military if they perceive that we're the bad guys, that we're raping, pillaging, killing indiscriminately. They won't support that war. We saw that, of course, with at the end of Vietnam, where the image was that we're baby killers, and then people kind of very much turned against it, even though it wasn't true. They said, wow, our military should not be doing these things. Well,
that's the thing. I mean, the Taliban, and frankly, every military force that the United States has gone to war against in the last 30 years, other than the Cold War, America could outfight them with a pinky finger. I mean, it was militarily no contest. The real battlefield, wasn't it, on the TV sets back home?
Yeah, it's a propaganda war, and of course we fight enemies that don't regard the law of war. They have the law of the jungle. They don't give a darn about the rules of engagement, law of war. But what makes the newspapers is not dog bites man, it's man bites dog. In other words, good guy does something bad. So when our soldiers do something bad at Abu Ghraib, that's front page 37 times. But the enemy's, you know, atrocities, oh, we don't even mention that.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, back in World War II, there were military reporters. They were really part of the armed services who would write reports that were as much PR as they were news. And the idea that, say, the New York Times would run a front page story releasing some confidential information that would have an impact on the war, that would be unthinkable in World War II. But it actually happens every month in this war.
It does, and many people, I think one of the reasons is that people see this as maybe a non-war. They say, well, it's not like World War II, which of course this is December the 7th, which is the start of the United States entrance into World War II. And they say, well, it's not really a real war, therefore we have more license to report on things that the government is doing or not doing. And of course that's a tragic misconception, because this is a real war, it's not a metaphor.
Now, the war on terror, that was actually specifically passed in Congress, because we're not fighting Iraq in particular, or Afghanistan in particular. There were particular groups. We I talked about this before. Remind our viewers, who was the war declared against, and how will we know if we've won it?
Yeah, the war on terror is a lousy term. It was coined by the Bush administration. It's sexy but lousy. It tells you we're at war because it has the war word in it, but terrorism is a tactic. You can't make a war on tactic. So people say, well, who are we at war with? Well, if you look closely at the authorization for use of military force, it says anyone that's responsible for 9/11, aka that is the Al Qaeda. We're at war with Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and associated forces, but that's too long to say, so we just call it the war on terror.
Yeah. Huh. So we are at war against Al Qaeda.
Yes.
We know how the Second World War ended with the absolute and unconditional surrender of the Axis. Yep. We know how other wars have ended through negotiation or a stalemate. I mean, I guess technically the war in Korea is not over. You know, I think, am I right? It's sort of a stalemate.
No, it's an armistice, yeah.
Yeah. How will we know when Al Qaeda, this war against Al Qaeda and its allies, is over?
We'll know when one of the three branches of the government in the United States tells us, because each branch has told us that this is a real war against enemy combatants. We call them unlawful enemy combatants. We have the right to kill them on sight, to detain them indefinitely, and to try them by military commissions. President Obama recognizes that. President Bush recognized it. Our Congress recognizes it. And our Supreme Court...
The media doesn't, I don't think.
Well, in large part, the media doesn't. But our Supreme Court has said this is a real war. Now, they've added extra protections for the enemy combatants because they're saying, look, this is a war, but it's not like other wars because, as you said, there's no surrender point. These guys don't wear uniforms. How do you know that you got the right guy? So they've demanded more due process protection for the enemy combatants, but they've always said that this is a real war. They've never said this is not a war, this is not a, this is a metaphor. No, it's a real war, and that's the premise. If we're at war, we've done nothing illegal. If we're not, we've done a lot of illegal stuff. We've detained people indefinitely, we've killed them on sight, we've used military commissions. You can't do that unless you're at war, real war.
We're talking with Dr. Jeffrey Adhikar. We've had him on the show before by remote. It's a pleasure to have him in the studio. Much more with him after the break. We're talking with Jeffrey Adhikar, a PhD at the School of Law at St. Mary's University in Texas. You used to be a lieutenant colonel. Tell me what it meant to be the legal advisor for all 5 U.S. Special Forces. First of all, what are they? I could probably guess. There's Delta Force, there's Rangers, there's Navy SEALs. Am I missing someone?
Well, we call it Special Operations, which encompasses all Special Forces. U.S. Army Special Forces are the Green Berets, and there are 5 Special Forces groups within the Green Berets. So I was a legal advisor for the Green Berets, the 5 groups in the Green Berets. What it was like? It was a lot of fun. I mean, we are everywhere. We're in dozens and dozens of countries at any time of the day or the year. Our primary mission is to support our allies, to assist them in training, and to provide a buffer zone, if you will, between hostile nations and the United States. So it's a very tiring job, but it's very rewarding. Everybody in there is a volunteer. They do it for love of country, and you get to jump out of airplanes and do all sorts of wonderful things.
We had an amazing Delta Force fellow on our show named Sergeant Lane Morris, who was blinded by Omar Khadr. I want to talk about Omar Khadr. I mean, he was captured, and he was with Al Qaeda. We discovered Al Qaeda home videos, imposing. I mean, his father was a financier for Al Qaeda. His family admits to Al Qaeda. There's no doubt that he was with the enemy. He's confessed it all, and we got it on tape, really. Under the law of war, he was captured. That's analogous to capturing a German soldier in World War II. Under the law of war, could we hold Omar Khadr in detention until the war is over?
Sure. The United States could certainly do it because we've declared war. Now, when we say declared war, the Congress hasn't declared war, but they've authorized war. But this is a real war. So the United States could certainly detain him indefinitely. The Canadians would have to also authorize this as a war, and therefore, under Canada law, they can say, okay, we're at war, we can detain him, because the law of war would apply to the Canadians, it applies to the United States. Any country that's at war, you follow the law of war. So that could certainly be done. I know the Americans could do it, but whether the Canadians would allow that or not is an open question.
You know, I actually know a fella who was a prisoner of war in Alberta, in Western Canada, a German soldier. He was captured. He was 16.
Yep.
It was 1945. He was pressed into service with the Hitler Youth. I think it was 15 or 16, forced to give a gun, to hold a gun. Within seconds of encountering the Allies, without firing a shot, he surrendered. A teenager, shipped over to Alberta, where he spent the rest of the war in the POW camp, and then he was released, and he loved it in Canada so much, he stayed here, grew up, he's in his 70s now. But he told me, it was a fascinating story, of because he wasn't treated like a child soldier. He was a soldier, he was put in the POW camp. Before he was released, he said, he was given a denazification exam. And he told me he got a B+.
Yeah.
I don't know what questions he got wrong. But I understand that, trying to teach these people that what you were doing, what motivated you was evil, inhuman, wrong. I don't know what would happen if he got an F on the exam, but do we do de-radicalization?
We do. In fact, President Bush in Guantanamo Bay, at one time we had over 800 people there, and we rehabilitated about 600 plus that we released. Now, come to find out, many of them lied to us and they weren't rehabilitated. But that's, I mean, you've hit on the point. In the short term, you've got to detain them, you've got to kill them. In the long term, you've got to turn them and basically say, you know, this is not what Islam requires. This is not how you go to heaven. What Islam requires, it's a works religion. You've got to work your way in by good deeds and rituals like everybody else. Because the Al-Qaeda mindset, the suicide bombers, they think if they kill themselves in jihad, it's a one-way ticket to heaven, which they're borrowing, of course, from the Christian concept of grace, but it's not pure grace because you've got to kill yourself.
You know, we've had Dr. Michael Wellner on the show. He examined Omar Khadr, interviewed him at length, studied all the papers, and said basically, to use his phrase, he was marinated in jihad.
Yep.
Dr. Wellner suggests that Omar Khadr went in as an Al-Qaeda youth, but came out even harder, memorized the Quran, hung out. So I would say the opposite is happening. Far from being de-radicalized, Guantanamo Bay has made these terrorists, well, it's been like a summer camp for them. And I don't say that as a joke. I mean, it's very relaxed. There's lots of sports. They interact with each other. I think that they're like swapping business cards and making contacts and encouraging each other.
Well, you're right. I've been to Gitmo, and that's exactly what occurs. They have a network system you wouldn't believe. They communicate with each other, and they actually further radicalize each other. They have rotating tasks to try to commit suicide because the message is that, you know, we died in Gitmo, therefore it's the Americans' fault. So they play that game very well, and the folks that are in Gitmo right now, they're the worst of the worst, about 165. They don't tell you that I didn't do it, I'm innocent. They'll look you in the eyes and say, I'm going to kill you. Let me out of here.
Now, do you think President Obama is going to close Guantanamo Bay? He promised he would do it within a year of being elected the first time. Obviously, he sees that was an impractical promise to make. But he's releasing some. He released some in September. He released Omar Khadr here. Do you think he wants to close it down?
Yes, he wants to, but I think it's the wrong message. I mean, if I was the president, I would announce I'm building another wing onto Gitmo today because we have nothing to apologize for. By closing it down, the signal is that we did something wrong. You know, you attacked us. You incinerated 3,000 people on 9/11. What did we do wrong? And the false propaganda out there, for example, when I give speeches, I ask the audience, how many people believe that we waterboard people at Guantanamo Bay? Almost everybody raises their hand. It never happened. No one was ever waterboarded at Guantanamo Bay. It was 3 individuals by the CIA at off-site locations. Only 3.
I want to ask you one last question because it was curious to me. I mean, Obama doesn't like Guantanamo. There's legal procedures that he has shown distaste for. But if reports are to be believed, his use of unmanned Predator drones has dramatically increased. So he'll see someone on a TV screen and authorize the pressing of a button. Is that lawful under the laws of war?
Yes, it's lawful to kill the enemy by any means, as long as you identify, of course, the right target. They're not trying to surrender. We try to limit collateral damage. So legally, he can do that. As a policy issue, I don't think it's doing any good because
we lose the intelligence. We can't.
You lose the intelligence. Plus, when you kill one, the 10 brothers now are radicalized, and it's a blood feud. So the propaganda is that we're killing the top leadership. That's not true. The vast majority of people he's killed with drones are lower-level individuals, and of course, it's a perfect game with drones because it's like shooting an arrow in a wall. Then they go over and draw a circle around it. Oh, I got a bullseye. How do you know it's Al-Qaeda? Because he's dead. I mean, the logic is circular.
Yeah. Last question for you. It's been 11 years since 9/11. Is Al-Qaeda strong? Is it stronger? Is it weaker? Has it changed its form and more resilient? What's your prognosis for the war against Al-Qaeda?
Yeah, the Al-Qaeda network is stronger. They've reconstituted in Iraq. That's why you never hear any news about Iraq, because it's all bad news. They have large presence now in Sudan, in Yemen, in Pakistan, of course. They're not really in Afghanistan anymore. The CIA has indicated the number of Al-Qaeda fighters is about 100, but they are strong. They're under new leadership. Dr. Zawahiri, who is from that Kiwanis club called the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian, he's now in control, and he's probably the brains of the operation. So no, it's going to be a long process, and that's just one slice of radical Islamic extremism. Not all jihadists in Canada or the United States belong to Al-Qaeda. They're just infected with the virus.
Yeah. Great to talk to you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Ezra. My pleasure.